Welcome again to the Speaker Spotlight. I'm James Henderson, president of the Florida Speakers Association. And once again, I'm really excited to be here with my buddy, Ken Okel. Ken is a past president of the Florida Speakers Association. He's very active in helping us do a lot of things. And so, Ken, welcome. I'm just really excited to have you today on the Speaker Spotlight.
Great to be here, James. Thank you so much. This is a great idea.
Well, I hope so. The idea, obviously, is we want people to get to know who Ken is. We want people to get to know what Ken does. And beyond that smile, right? Beyond that smile, we want them to know what's happening back there with Ken Okel. Well, let's just jump right in, Ken. The first question that I have, and I think probably is the broadest question, is describe your business. What is it that the TV guy does, right? And then also do that two ways for me. Describe it if you were talking to a potential client, and then also describe your business if you were talking to a fellow NSA member.
My pleasure, too. So I would say that I work with leaders to help improve their performance on the job, especially their performance under pressure. And I pull from my background, which is in the world of television news, hurricane relief, and believe it or not, professional ballet administration. Wasn't a dancer. In terms of what I would say to a speaker, I might add that really a lot of my material is almost like a Rubik's Cube, where I have a lot of stories, a lot of examples, a lot of case studies that I can share. What I try to do is really personalize it for the client, to really listen to them ahead of time, find out what are some of their needs, what are some of their pressure points, so that I'm able to adjust my material to really match their needs.
Awesome. So you're very, very collaborative with the client.
I think in today's world, it really pays off. And I think as speakers, we always have to look for an edge. Right. And I'm not a former Olympian. I'm not a millionaire. I'm a guy. But
you could have been a dancer, though, Ken. You could have been a dancer.
Yeah, I could have been a dancer. But, if you can find, hey, this is where I can make a difference, where they might say, that guy was really fun to work with. We enjoyed working with him. That's a definite plus for speakers, and something we need to keep in mind.
You said something really interesting that I really liked when we were kind of conversing about what we were going to talk about. And let me just quote you directly. You said, and I want you to just kind of expound on this a little bit. You said broadcasting equals daily pressure, ballet equals ongoing pressure, and disaster relief equals crisis pressure. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by that and how that plays into your business as it works right now.
I realize that there are different forms of pressure because everyone can say their job is stressful and they can be right about it. But I think in a lot of cases, you have to dive a little deeper to look at it. So for instance, with broadcast news, the pressure was really hourly. You had to come up with a story in a matter of hours, sometimes in a matter of minutes. I mean, there were some examples where I would come into work at 3 o'clock. You're going to be live at 5 o'clock. You're going at least a 45-minute drive away. We don't know who you can talk to. We're not totally sure about the story, but you need to be able to talk about it and have video and interviews by 5. That's the challenge right there. When I worked in the ballet world, the challenge for a lot of arts groups, and especially this was during the recession, was financial. How do you keep the show going when it's so expensive? I mean, for the ballerinas, we had 11 of them. These ladies needed point shoes. Those cost $125 a pair. You can't buy them on credit. You got to pay cash. And I can't tell the dancers to dance a little less because they could wear out those shoes in one rehearsal or one performance. So you're always having to think about, okay, how am I today going to work towards the goals that we have? That's a different type of pressure. And then the pressure with the hurricane relief is there's just been a storm. People are hurting. How do you help them? And often you're having to figure things out, as you're going along. Like for instance, when I was once working a distribution site, giving out the food, the water, the ice, it became apparent that in the community that was surrounded the area, there were some people, very low income, didn't even have a car. So a drive-through center was not going to help them. And there were also, fortunately, some people who could help bridge the language barrier. So on the fly, we could decide, okay, we're going to quietly set up a corner of this site to distribute the materials to that population. Now, if someone else walks up, we're not going to turn away, but we're not going to publicize this for someone to try to skip the line. That's an adjustment, a call you got to make in the moment. So from all these experiences, I've kind of learned about gee, we all face pressure on the job, and there's different types of it, and how you respond and how you learn from it. It's very important.
Okay. I want to move on a little bit because as you know, I wanted to be a broadcaster. My lifelong goal was to broadcast live from the White House lawn. Although I don't know if I were coming up today, if that would be my goal.
Lawn's pretty crowded today.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing now than it was in like 1968 when I was thinking about it. But I always, and I think I've asked you this question before, why would a guy who has an in, he's on the road to broadcasting and he's doing that, why would you leave such a glamorous and lucrative job and career path to move on and move away from that?
There was a few things that happened. So I worked in news for about 11 years, which nowadays is a pretty good career. And in a lot of ways, I would compare it to professional sports like football, basketball. It's not going to be your job for the rest of your life. It's going to be something you're going to do for a little while. During the time that I was in the industry, I started to see a little bit of a shift where when I got out of college, there were certain stations where I could not get any attention from. They would not hire me until I had at least 5 years of experience. So I went to smaller stations and worked my way up. During the time of my career, though, things became more cost conscious. There were a lot of station groups, people who owned stations. There were mom and pop groups that owned stations, one or two. Now about 4 or 5 companies own all the TV stations across the country. A lot of those people are really looking at saving money. So suddenly a station where you could not get a job until you had 5 years experience is now hiring people out of college because it was cheaper. I also saw that there was an increased role of some consultants or some people saying, well, we want to make the news kind of like it is everywhere, and let's do a lot of crime reporting, blood and guts. That got away from some of the storytelling that I enjoyed. So I remember I looked around the newsroom at one point and I realized, and this is not an exaggeration, half the newsroom is on antidepressants, at least half. And I realized it'd be better to leave while I was still enjoying it than to stay too long if I wasn't. And I have to say, had I stuck around, I would imagine at some point I would have been laid off because of seniority, probably would have cost a little bit more. They could have replaced me with someone cheaper.
Right.
So for a variety of reasons, I just said, hey, let's take the talents and skills I have and see what else is out there. Now, the funny thing, James, is that just as I was leaving broadcasting, this little thing called YouTube started to emerge. So now I realized, hey, I have this skill set that I could actually use in other ways. So when I was at that ballet company, I'm doing behind the scenes YouTube videos to connect with our donors, to let people know what we're doing. And then I started to realize, hey, I could do videos for my speaking business as well. And hey, I could do my own demo video because I know how to do that. Oh, I could do demo videos for other people too. So I realized that I'm still in broadcasting in a way, but I'm just broadcasting to a different audience and I'm not necessarily working for a station. I mean, I am amazed at how the technology has kept going forward, where the stuff in your iPhone is better than the cameras we lugged around in the 1990s. So it's a long answer for a simple question, but I think people always have to be looking at where are you at? Are you still enjoying it? What's ahead? And is it maybe time to make a change?
Right. And I think a lot of people are that way in their speaking business right now. How can I adjust? What's new? What is it that I'm willing to accept? Because there are some people out there, Ken, that you mentioned YouTube. Some people out there just don't want to do video. They just want to be on the stage. Some people don't want to do Zoom webinars. Some people don't want to do that platform. They're making those decisions, just like you said, right now.
Yeah, and that's tricky. I mean, I think speakers probably should embrace video since speaking is a visual medium, but I respect people's decision. Often I think about a term, especially right now during the coronavirus, it's availability. It's making yourself available for opportunities. I'm someone who's having to adjust my business a lot because I did a lot of stuff on stage. Now that may be coming back. Certain events just said we're going to postpone till next year. We're not even looking at doing virtual right now. That scares us. So there's a lull. So I need to make sure that I'm learning more about virtual, that I'm practicing on a daily basis, that I'm taking good care of myself, getting enough rest, taking care of my health, because I need to be available, because there could be one of those opportunities that comes up with very little lead time. Am I ready to go? I think often we think, oh, like when we're in an audience at NSA and we're listening to a presentation, they're all great, but maybe sometimes people might say, I should be up there. And it's a human emotion. I understand that. But sometimes I've thought about it in a different way, where it's like, well, let's say before those presentations began at NSA, that big stage, and the president of NSA walked up to you and said, you know what? Our speaker has laryngitis. He or she can't talk today. Can you take their slot? You're on in 10 minutes. Would you be able to do that?
Right.
Now, that's a big challenge that a lot of us would have to face. But in terms of availability, that's a different level of professional expertise. If you could go onto the main stage at NSA with 10 minutes notice versus needing weeks to prepare.
Right, and being prepared, that's awesome. Well, tell you what, let's move on just a little bit, because you've had a wide variety of experiences, to say the least, right? So how has that affected the culture of the business that you have now, and how would you describe the nuts and bolts of the culture that your business takes on?
I think a lot, kind of about three ideas, which is really service, creativity, and enthusiasm. If I was to define what my business is, and the service, that's about the customer, the client, the person who I'm trying to serve, the ones whose needs I'm trying to solve. And that's where we do a lot of the pre-interview or the pre-session interviews and such, where we're making sure that I'm getting a good feel for who they are. What words might I say that could really offend them? For instance, I learned with facility managers, they don't like the word janitor. They like the word custodian. So if I walk in there saying the wrong word, woo, they might get mad. They're not going to clean up after me, that's for sure. And then I always try to find, okay, what's a creative solution? And I think part of that process, I develop a certain amount of enthusiasm for what I'm doing. And I think enthusiasm can be contagious in a very good way, where we start to get excited about things and maybe open our minds to certain possibilities.
Well, one of the things that you just said really piques me, because I'm all about leadership and that sort of thing. But one of the things that piqued me when you just said that was, you not only are concerned and considerate of those people that hire you, whether it be the meeting planner, whether it be the head of the company or whatever, you're also sensitive and aware of those people who might be offended. I mean, the janitor's not going to be the person that's writing, that's paying your bill, right? But you're also aware of that. I think that's important. Elaborate just a little bit more about why that's so important, because I think that's big. It's the little things sometimes, Ken, that are really, really big.
It's very true, because often a little thing that we say could really affect someone and make them turn you off and not hear anything else that you're saying. I understand too, when I was talking to some club managers of these giant retirement villages and places like that, that it's not customers, it's members and guests. And if you say customers, they're going to think, oh, this is just a generic sales presentation. They don't know anything about me. So it's really important to make sure that you're speaking their language, you're understanding their concerns, because when they hear you taking the effort to do that, they'll perk up and pay more attention, versus if it's a situation where they kind of feel like, oh man, he just called us something we hate or said something awkward. You need to be careful of that. Real quick story. Years ago, I was doing some speaking actually for a charity. And as part of that, we were going into banks, very beginning of the day, before the banks even opened, to talk to employees real quick. In this situation, it's always funny going into a bank at the beginning of the day, because you have to make sure you convince people that you're not robbing them. But beyond that, the funny thing is that before I went, the manager talked to the employees, and I guess things had not been going well, because she was basically like, you guys stink, you're horrible, and you're lucky to have your jobs. Here's Ken to talk about helping out charity. And I realized, oh man, this audience is a little tense and probably stressed out. So I need to modulate my remarks a little bit to calm them down and to open their minds. So if you can do that, you can do really well. I mean, just think about our interactions in customer service, where maybe we have a complaint or something. How you approach someone can be very important for the resolution that you get, because sometimes it's about someone going the extra mile for you. How you react to that situation, how you present yourself, can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Now, I've been trying to move away from COVID-19 talk and all those sorts of things, but it is a stark reality that the last 8 months 9 months have really changed the way we do things. First of all, what's the biggest challenge that you have in your business right now in moving forward and away from the difficulties of COVID-19? And maybe what's something that you learned or you picked up or you were challenged to do that you're glad that you were able to do, and you might not have done it had COVID-19 not come along?
Sure. I think some of the biggest adjustment is just the uncertainty. So as I mentioned before, some of it is just making sure you're available, that you're taking the time to work on the things you need to work on, adjusting your material, because certain material I have may not fit anymore. So it's transforming some of that, repackaging some of your message. I mean, it might just be 10% different, but if you can find a way to connect a little better with your audience, that's a good thing. Again, so some of that might fall into that category of stuff I wouldn't have done. I've also talked to probably more meeting planners and people in bureaus just to hear, okay, what are you hearing? How are things being sold? How are talks being sold right now? Why are people buying? One meeting planner I talked to, he's like, I'm in an RV. I'm just going to drive around the country for a few weeks because nobody's buying. But he said, hey, if you can do master of ceremonies things too, that might help. So it's like, oh, okay, I've done that before. So I need to make sure that I'm making that available to people as possibly an option, or hey, maybe that's just the whole deal they have.
Right. That's awesome. That's awesome. So if you, and it's quite possible, if let's say one of our aspiring speakers called you up and said, hey, Ken, what's the one thing that you could tell me to take me from being a aspiring speaker to jettisoning me to having a speaking business? What would be the one thing or a couple of things that you would tell them that are essential?
I think it's good to have rituals and to have things that you're doing on a consistent basis. So I would probably give them a lot of homework, but I'd say, okay, start working on your material. Start working on 5 minutes. Get 5 minutes down. That's really good. Now, after 5 minutes, can you do 10 or 7? Really good material that you just know. Now, over time, you may change that material. You'll probably improve it, but start off just with that short talk that you could give, where you're giving one idea and you're illustrating it in a creative fashion. At the same time, I'd say start rituals for looking for clients. Identifying, okay, where are places where I might be able to speak? Who are the people that I can talk to? That way you can start to have some of your marketing outreach. Don't just leave these things to chance. You need to make sure that you have, for me at least, rituals and systems and processes. Now you got to remember, on news, I have it hardwired in me that by 5 o'clock, we got to have a story on. So you got to figure it out. So I still am very much about, goal setting, achieving it, moving on. So trying to think about, what are the things you can do on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, that can help grow your business, especially if you're working at a different job or something like that. Don't just try to do it all at once. Set some goals, spread it out, create a process where you can be successful over time.
Right. And one of the things that this, there are a lot of people that come in and that people are afraid to be a beginner, right? People are afraid to say, I don't know that yet. Just so that they know, when you look at that process of coming up with that first good 5 minutes, and that first good 10 minutes, and then when you look at the people that you reach out to and finding out what's needed out there, how much do you reach out to other people? For example, fellow FSAers, fellow NSAers, fellow speakers that people that you knew from the news business. How much input do you get from other people? Because I think people think that once a speaker gets to a certain level that they've got it dialed in and they don't reach out anymore. So share a little bit about that with us.
Sure. The word that comes to my mind is levels. So I think there are kind of levels where people can help you. So often when we would have our meetings, I usually try to arrive early because it's fun just to talk to people. And that's often where you hear someone's doing something. Oh, you're doing a coaching program. Okay, I don't do a coaching program. Tell me about what's that been like. Hopefully they'll say something more than $29.95 a month. It's like, okay, well, how did you do it? Or what's the biggest surprise that you've had?
Right.
So that can be good with peers. Sometimes I've gotten together with some other speakers to work some material and just kind of see what is of interest to them. I said levels though, because sometimes you want to get feedback, but you don't necessarily want to listen to all of it because it can be contrarian or it may be from someone's viewpoint. For instance, perhaps a speaker comes from a background is very successful, kind of being about, I'm good enough, I'm strong enough, you can do it. Great message, great speech. That might not apply to someone who's talking to confident executives who want to make more money.
Right.
So you would want to be careful in terms of how much you took that feedback. At a certain level, I do think it's good to invest in someone who is better than you, who is able to look at your material really from a neutral standpoint. They may not know you, and really give you some feedback in terms of, okay, shorten this, make this longer. So there's value at different levels. But to get back to the original question, having people an email away or a phone call away, which FSA and NSA provide people, is invaluable, because you can Google a lot, but a simple call can save you a lot of time and sometimes give you that good information that you can't find online, or just, it's like, hey, what's the skinny on this?
That's awesome. And now that you brought us there, you've been involved. A lot of people in NSA that are not involved. There are some people who are in FSA who are not involved. You've been involved. You've been a past president. What's the value and what are the things that keep you involved? And it's just like I called you and you said yes. What are the things that keep you saying yes about NSA and FSA? I'm assuming what you just said is one of them, but what are some of the other reasons why you keep saying yes?
Well, whatever happens in your volunteer role, you're going to learn something. You're going to gain some insight. I also think, if I'm talking to people in kind of the leadership area, if I'm not taking on opportunities to show leadership in my everyday life, that could be a concern or a problem, because you're going to learn things from doing that. I mean, when I was working at that ballet company, that was a struggle. But I heard someone use an analogy recently about when you're, let's say, a college basketball coach and you go to the professional level, very often the jobs that you get are not the great jobs with the superstars. You're going to go there, you're going to struggle a little bit, but sometimes in situations where you're struggling, you're going to learn a lot. Mm-hmm. So I would say as well, working with a group like NSA or FSA, volunteering, you're going to meet people, you're going to hear ideas, you're going to have a chance to try stuff and see how it works. So don't think of it as a one-way transaction where you're just giving. You're getting something back as well. And sometimes, we've talked about this, James, the person who you sit next to at the meetings, who you say hi to or get coffee with, you don't necessarily know a lot about them. Right. And they might be a treasure trove of information that could help you in your business. They're right there. You just got to be able to listen.
Yeah, that's big. That's great information. And the thing about it is that sometimes we assume that person who's sitting next to us doesn't need to know anything that we know. We may have a nugget for them that, even though they may be a level ahead of us, we still might have something that we're doing that we're really good at that they can learn from too. So it's, so it can always be a two-way street.
And I think because there's so many different ways you can have your business structured. Mm-hmm. And also, time is often one of our biggest challenges, because we don't always have enough time to write a new book or develop new speeches or do outreach or manage staff. So if people are able to help us better use that time, we can be a lot more successful. And I think too, as speakers, we always have to be cognizant that our lives can't just be all about work, that we need to make sure that we're also honoring our family members, our relatives, and our friends. So while we may be working 60 hours a week, we need to make sure that we're also working on the other aspects of our life. So I think we can learn so much from our peers, and different people are going to be in different places. So I think it's good to have an open mind, start a conversation, and listen.
Right. One of the things, and it just struck me, Ken, and I just want you to comment on it quickly. You said something earlier on when we first started talking. You were talking about the piece about you were talking about being available, but you said, about being in shape, being in good health, making sure that you have all of those things in place. And just now you talked about, making sure that you're rested and that you're available, all those sorts of things. The central theme is that we are really the engine to our business. And if we don't keep that engine tuned up, all of those other things really can't run that well. You can talk to the people next to you. And quite frankly, some of those things about finding ways to make more time for yourself, finding ways to stay in shape when you're on a plane all the time, even how to pack. I mean, we had Bruce Turkel talk to us about how to pack for a 2-day trip one time. Even those things that are lifestyle things, you can learn from those other members of FSA and NSA. That's a great point. I love that.
As you were saying about the cars too, are you that expensive import sports car that can go super fast, looks really good, but is in the shop every other week?
Right.
So it's kind of like, well, that car is great, but maybe it would be better to get something that's a little more reliable or dependable, or just figure out, am I driving the wrong way for the sports car? Because like I said, availability, it's a big thing. I mean, we see it a lot in professional sports or college sports where a player isn't available to play. So it doesn't matter how good they are if they can't play. Making sure that you're taking all the steps that you can to control those variables. And I realize there are wild cards that happen all the time, but hey, have you ever not done a good job when you've had enough sleep the night before? Usually those go together. Those are successful habits. Or just where, even with things like last year, I had a string of flights where there were delays because of weather. So for me, I've got it down where always have some food with me. I got an iPad full of stuff I can look at. I'm recording outreach videos in the airport. I'm just like, I got a list of names of people I can write to, so that it's like, okay, I hate the delay, but let's make use of it and make it work for us.
We've seen a few of those airport videos. I kind of like that off the cuff. That's awesome. Here's one thing. I love people who are diverse and they're versatile and have a large number of interests, right? It means that their feelers are out and they're open to other ideas and those sorts of things. I did ask you this question. I asked you to reply to this question. If you weren't a speaker right now, what other career, what other avocation would you think that you might be doing? What's something that interests you? And I loved your answer because you didn't give me a direct answer. So
yeah, I really struggled with that because it's hard for me to think, but some of that is that a lot of my career or my professional life has not been a straight line. It's had a lot of curves in it. For instance, who would have thought that I'd be running a professional ballet company?
Right.
Well, one day I'm on a treadmill and I get a call and someone says, hey, you might be good for this. Okay, I'll listen to that. Never in 1,000 years would I have thought of that. And I was even thinking today about some of the broadcasting jobs I got where I'm working at local stations all over the country. Sometimes you get flown out for an interview, but often the station didn't have the money to do that. So you're talking to someone over the phone. Back then, there wasn't as much internet. Right. So you're kind of agreeing to work in a place you've never seen, you don't know anything about. I mean, you don't even know how to pronounce the streets. So you have to adapt. So often it is kind of like, well, I guess if I was to do something else, maybe it'd be, I would imagine some sort of communication, some sort of me talking, sharing information, perhaps not as a speaker, but in some sort of other way, or writing copy, something like that. But I've learned that the road ahead for me is kind of unknown and it's difficult to predict. So I tried to be more prepared for the opportunity, to have my eyes open, and to not necessarily shut the door if someone says, hey, you ever think about doing this? Where it's like, maybe I should think about that.
Right. That's awesome. That's good stuff, because really what you're saying is, there are two pieces to that. The first piece is that you need to be prepared for any eventuality, for anything that might happen. But the second piece is, in the interim, you have to be comfortable in that interim. You have to be comfortable with the unknown, because there are people who really struggle if they can't map out that next week, that next month, that next year, which is why so many people are having a difficult time right now, because speakers who had all of their events lined up for the next 365 days,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, now it's all the unknown. But it's the people who are prepared and comfortable, not comfortable in a way that you just relax and say it's no big deal, but comfortable in the space that says, I'm comfortable that I'll do all the things I need to do, so that when I know that the phone's going to ring, or I know I'm going to be able to talk to that right person, but I'm comfortable doing all the things right now that are going to have me prepared when that phone rings or when that person comes calling, right?
It's very true. And almost two further observations on that. I learned with news that your story can change on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might be working on one thing and all of a sudden, boom, you got to drop that story and switch gears and go to something that's totally different. And then also, I learned a good lesson years ago. I had some problems with cancer back in my 20s. And I remember a nurse once told me, a lot of waiting involved in that, a lot of uncertainty involved with that. And she said, expect the best, but prepare for the worst.
Right.
And that was good advice, because again, it was a situation where you don't have control over that. And maybe on certain days you have to search for something you have control over. Is it putting one less thing, a sweetener into your coffee? That might be all you can control that day. If you can end the day saying, okay, what did I do? Well, I did that. I had a little less sweetener in my coffee. Not exactly world changing, but at least you did something that day that you could control, rather than just feeling like you have no options. You're just blowing around in the air like a leaf or something in the wind. So, and unfortunately, we celebrate the good moments in life, but sometimes there's going to be sad times. Someone's going to leave home today, go to work, and there's going to be a car accident. They're not going to make it home, or some other random thing will happen that is out of your control, nothing you can do. So you have to kind of think ahead of time. How will I handle this? What can I learn from this? Can I prepare for it? And then how much is it going to impact me afterwards, where I maybe say, you know what, this was horrible. This stunk. Let's move on. Focus on something I can control.
Good job. Hey, let's do some quick fun stuff. All right.
Sure.
First of all, first question is, who in the speaking industry, who in NSA, who in the speaking industry is someone that you look up to, or someone that really stands out to you?
There's a lot of people, and I kind of thought about that, because often if I hear someone say, oh, this speaker's really good, I'll see if I can find some clips of him or her on YouTube and look at that and see, not only the message, but how the message is being delivered. Because I think we can always learn, not steal, but just learn from, gee, that person's doing this. Almost like watching a magic trick, where you're like, okay, they're doing something there. That's pretty cool. One speaker, and he's come many times to our chapter, and every time he comes, he always is given a little different stuff. He's not like the greatest hits or something like that. Someone I've always admired is Lou Heckler, because I think he has the technical skills, but he also has the aesthetic skills as well, where he's always able to find little things that makes a story a little bit better or connects better with an audience. And Lou is interesting too, because he really decided to structure his speaking business in a certain way, where, if I still believe it's true, he does the keynoting. He also does where people come to him for one-on-one coaching.
Yep.
He's not doing a lot of the other stuff because he wanted to kind of create a life that fit what he wanted to do outside of speaking. So I respect that a lot. I'm always interested to see what Lou is doing. He's been doing a great job with the NSA's VIP suite. And one of the big takeaways I take from that is he is always does a great job of expressing curiosity.
Right.
Sometimes when we ask a question of someone, we're waiting for them to shut up so we can talk. He, I can tell, is really listening to the person. So Lou Heckler is someone I've always admired.
Awesome. Awesome. So if there's one thing, as we close, if there's one thing that an interesting tidbit, something that people don't know, and everybody knows that you've been in broadcasting. Everybody knows that you were in charge of the ballet. But if there's one interesting tidbit that people should know that they'd be interested or surprised by, what would that be, Ken?
I'm going to have to try to remember what I was thinking about before. Sometimes it is, you go back through your life and you're like, oh yeah, I did that. Oh, that was interesting. Let's see. I would, often it's not always the big stuff. I mean, I learn a lot from people I meet, and sometimes it's ordinary people. Like I once met this older gentleman who his life's thing was putting together these old motor scooters. He just loved doing that, and his passion for that was interesting. Other side of the spectrum, I once covered the KKK, and being around some of those people, they were some of the most angry people I'd ever been around. Not even like saying anything, but just the vibe they gave off was just hate and anger. And that really stuck with me there. Often I think a lot about, what's a good moment for me, or what's a day where I feel it was well spent. It could be where I realized that I connected with somebody and helped solve a problem that they had where they didn't think there was any hope. And sometimes too, it's just little moments in life. Once I was working in news, I was anchoring and producing the weekend newscast. So I'm basically the boss. And one of the crews, reporter and the photographer, they were spending hours together on the weekend, working. And they were just starting to get on each other's nerves. And they were kind of snapping at each other. Well, you said this and you said that. And I remember I was just like, guys, let's just sit down. And they said, do we have to? I said, come on, just do it. Just humor me. And I was just like, so what's the deal? And what's the deal? And within about 30 seconds, they were both hugging because they're just like, it wasn't you, it's just everything. And it was like, well, that day I was able to do some good, and I was able to facilitate something that kind of got some of the problems out of the way and helped someone. So those are those little moments. They don't always end up in a book or a story on stage, but they're little kind things that we can do to people that make the world a better place. So if I can do some of those, I feel like I'm making the world a better place and maybe making myself a better person.
Ken, great stuff. On behalf of FSA, when they see this, and then also on behalf of myself, thank you for your time today. It was really incredible. And some of the answers, some of the stuff like I hadn't known, and we've been around each other, off and on for a few years now. It was just really great to have you. And I think a lot of the things that you said about being involved are really important. And I want to thank you for staying involved and being involved in our chapter. It's really, really awesome. So all of you FSAers, I want you to know that you got to get involved. You have to be around because you can learn. It is a benefit to you to stay involved. So stay tuned. Let's thank Ken, but let's stay tuned for our next speaker spotlight. FSA, we'll see you later.